Well, hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman. House trial. And we're first going to start by giving a little bit of background on this whole trial, what it was about, what people are saying, this kind of thing. And then we're going to go into our thoughts. So first of all, Kyle Rittenhouse was a 17-year-old male who stood accused of murdering two men and the shooting of a third in Kenosha, Wisconsin in August of 2020. Now, why is this national news? Why did it happen? Who are these people? Why do we care? These are great questions. People tend to have a short memory, but let's rewind back to the Summer of Love in 2020. There were riots in major cities all across the countries, riots that killed over 36 people, by the way. In August of 2020, Jacob Blake, who was a black man, was shot by police in Kenosha, Wisconsin. This shooting sparked a wave of BLM protests and anti-police demonstrations in multiple cities, including Kenosha, Wisconsin. I want to take a small digression here to talk about the shooting of Jacob Blake. I can't remember if back in August we did a podcast about this, but Jacob Blake had a warrant out for his arrest stemming from a domestic abuse charge and an allegation of digital rape. The woman in question alleged that he shoved his fingers inside her against her will, and the woman who accused him of this was the woman who called 911 on Jacob Blake the day that he was shot. Jacob Blake, who she had a restraining order against, showed up at her house, took her car keys away from her, which caused her to call 911. So police show up. Blake refuses to comply. They attempt to use a taser on him, but the tasers, both of their tasers, there are two officers on scene, both of them attempt to tase him. Both of the tasers do not work, so they do not incapacitate Jacob Blake. Jacob Blake goes around to the front seat of his car. He picks up a knife. He then tries to turn. The officers tell him to drop the knife. He doesn't drop the knife. Jacob Blake gets shot for his trouble. Now, that is the shooting in question that caused Blake, that caused all these protests and demonstrations and eventually riots. So right off the bat, that case is a ridiculous case of police brutality. You have an alleged rapist who, by the way, since that time has pled guilty to charges of domestic abuse and trespassing. I believe part of his plea deal, he did not plead. They dropped the third-degree sexual assault charge, and instead he pled guilty to domestic violence and trespassing. But he pled guilty. So he was guilty. He had a knife. He was shot by the police. That causes all of these protests, which on the first night turned riot. So right off the bat, we have a police force who shows up against an armed domestic abuser and shoots him, and apparently this is some sort of systemic racism in the system. It's a ridiculous case. So Kenosha, Wisconsin, erupts into protests which devolve into riots on day one in Kenosha after this happens. Day one, there is an attempted arson of the Kenosha County Courthouse. A car lot is set on fire and over 100 cars go up in flames. A police officer is knocked in the head with a brick, causing him to be going to the emergency room, and a state of emergency is declared. Day two of the riots, the National Guard is called in. There are apartment buildings, a furniture store, several residential houses, a garbage truck, and the Wisconsin Department of Corrections are all set on fire. In total, 40 buildings were burned down, and $50 million in damage was done. So now we have day three. This is the day of the shooting. This is the day Kyle Rittenhouse shows up. A car lot that Kyle Rittenhouse and his friend have sort of loose connections to. I guess they knew the owner. A car lot in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kyle Rittenhouse decides with his friend to go and stand guard at this car lot. Now, there is a little bit of a controversy because the car lot owner says that he never actively engaged them to come do it. They said that he did. The text messages are a little vague, so it's hard to say. Anyway, Kyle Rittenhouse shows up. A lot has been made about him crossing state lines to do this. Kenosha, Wisconsin is 20 miles from Antioch, Illinois. Kyle Rittenhouse, a lot of people don't know this, his father, his aunt, his uncle, his grandmother, and his cousin all live in Kenosha. He's not a stranger to Kenosha. He didn't drive across a vast stretch of land to a place he has no connection to. He has deep ties to Kenosha, Wisconsin. That's why he was there. That's why he showed up. He knew the owner of the car lot in which he was, quote unquote, protecting. So right there, he didn't randomly show up. And anyone who talks about him driving across state lines to do this thing as though he was driving across to look for trouble, it's ridiculous. It's not a real point. Just ignore them. So Rittenhouse, here's what we know happened the day of the shooting. Before the shooting took place, Rittenhouse is seen cleaning up graffiti off of a local high school. He's interviewed twice before the shootings occur. 2 times he's asked, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Oh, we're protecting this lot, trying to make sure that this car lot doesn't get set on fire. And we're also here to provide medical care if anyone needs help." He's seen going up to rioters in the street and asking them if they need medical attention. He had a little med kit. I guess he had been taking some classes. I think he was referring to himself as an EMT, which I do not believe is true. He was a first responder. He had the first responder certification. So he had been basically trained in some basic first aid. He did a firefighting and a police officer cadet program type deal in Antioch. So he had base medical knowledge, but he's going up to people, asking them if they need help. And he's also seen being threatened. This was testified to by witnesses called by the defense. Joseph Rosenbaum threatened to kill Kyle Rittenhouse if he saw him. He said, "If I catch you alone, I'm going to kill you." This is one of the men that Kyle Rittenhouse shot that night. Joseph Rosenbaum threatened to kill Kyle Rittenhouse. Eventually, later on in the day, they run into each other again, and there's some sort of confrontation. Kyle Rittenhouse runs away. He is chased. Here we go. He is chased by Joseph Rosenbaum. Joseph Rosenbaum attempts to grab his gun and pull it away from him, at which point, after being chased and then trying to have his gun away, Kyle Rittenhouse shoots Joseph Rosenbaum and kills him. Now, at this point, Kyle Rittenhouse is there. A large group of people attempt to gather around the shooting that just happened. So Kyle Rittenhouse says, "Oh, I have to get out of here. These people are going to turn on me." So he turns and he starts running away towards the police. He is chased again. He is chased again down the street, where he is struck in the head by a skateboard by Anthony Huber. Anthony Huber hits him in the head with a skateboard, which is a deadly weapon. What do you think? He was attempting to hit him in the skateboard to open a dialogue? No, he was attempting to harm him. He's hit in the head with a skateboard. Kyle Rittenhouse turns. He then shoots Anthony Huber. Now, the third person who was shot testified. This is his testimony, and it's on video. He was holding a pistol. He had drawn a pistol from his waistband. He had his arm in the air. He then points the gun at Kyle Rittenhouse, and Kyle Rittenhouse shoots him after he points a pistol at Kyle Rittenhouse. So Kyle Rittenhouse shoots him and immobilizes him. He then runs to the police, who have no idea what's going on. He then leaves the area and then drives to the police station to turn himself in. I think he leaves. I think he goes back to Antioch, and then he and his mom go to the police station together. I believe that is what happened. So this is what happened. Now, the media from day one, the corporate media from day one, has misrepresented this story to the fullest extent of their powers. They have called Kyle Rittenhouse a white. Kyle Rittenhouse has ever said or done anything racist in his life. None. None was brought up. So they libeled him. They slandered the man as a white supremacist where there is no evidence. And they basically condemned him from the jump, from the opening bell. So none of it was true when the whole story came out. This is why you should not hear a situation, prejudge the situation, and then attempt to conform your narrative around the situation. This is the media can't help themselves. The corporate media cannot help. It's incredibly irresponsible the way that they behaved throughout the course of on the internet post-verdict who talk about a white man is now free to go and shoot black people at will, that this was a victory for white supremacy, any sort of this nonsense. First of all, every person that Kyle Rittenhouse shot was white. Every one of them. All three of the people that he shot were white. All three of them were career criminals. One of them was a convicted child molester, and the other one had just been released from jail for some sort of domestic abuse charge, something along those lines. It's ridiculous that he doesn't go there looking for trouble. Listen to his interviews. He's there to protect a car lot. This is the fault, by the way, of the media, who said that these protests were mostly peaceful. We all remember Kenosha, Wisconsin is the spot where there's a CNN reporter standing in front of a burning building and said, well, in the chyron at the bottom says mostly peaceful protest. That's where that whole meme comes from. It comes from Kenosha when CNN was trying to tell us that it was mostly peaceful. I just read the aftermath of that. 40 buildings burned down, $50 million in damage, multiple officers injured from assaults from rioters. And they want to convince you that this was mostly peaceful. And by the way, or the people like Nicole Hannah-Jones who say that it's property is just property, and you shouldn't worry about it. If a rioter burns down a building, it doesn't matter. It's not a person. That's ridiculous. This is a ridiculous proposition. You have every right to defend your property, which is all Kyle Rittenhouse was doing. He was down there to defend a car lot of a person that he knew because 100 cars had just been burned in a lot the day before or 2 days before. So this is the media's fault more than anything else. It is the corporate press who tried to convince us that these protests last year were mostly peaceful. They were not. There was one that happened here in St. Louis where I live, right around my house. And there were a building that burned down. There were multiple fires lit in the middle of streets that completely shut down a section of the city. It wasn't peaceful. That's not a peaceful protest. A march during the day is a peaceful protest. A boycott is a peaceful form of protest. Lighting fires in the street and burning down buildings is a riot. The second that something catches on fire, congratulations, you've upgraded. You're no longer a peaceful protest. You are a riot. The second that a police officer gets hit with a brick, you are no longer a peaceful protest. You're a riot. So the media did a terrible job all throughout the course of this trial, convincing us that Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist, a mass shooter, all these things. And the results of this were always going to be known to anyone who paid attention to this trial. This was clearly a case of self-defense. Ignore for a moment whether or not you believe Kyle Rittenhouse should have gone down there. The question is, did he have a right to do that? And did he have a right to shoot those people when he did? So, one, when they make the case that he came across state lines, I already said it's a ridiculous case. It doesn't deserve any merit. There is an important distinction, though, about bringing weapons across state lines to do harm. He didn't do that. He obtained the AR in Wisconsin. So the gun never crossed state lines. There's a law in Wisconsin that says people under the age of 18 aren't allowed to have certain kinds of weapons, but he actually didn't violate that law because it doesn't apply to long-barreled rifles. So he didn't break a law there. That charge was dismissed. People were making a case that this court case was biased from the start. They don't like the judge. They don't like the judge because the judge wouldn't allow the prosecution to use the term victims, but they allowed the defense to use the term rioters. Well, you can't use the term victims. You can't use the term victims. The whole case is designed to find out whether or not, in fact, those three men were victims or perpetrators. You can't call them victims if the whole case hinges on whether or not they're victims. It doesn't work that way. And then He yelled at the prosecution twice during the case. So now I've seen people out here accusing the judge of being complicit in white supremacy. This is nonsense. This is nonsensical. Cori Bush, my esteemed congresswoman here in Missouri, said that the judge, the jury, the verdict, it all is upholding white supremacy. And she's just the worst. That is just the worst take. That you're accusing this judge of white supremacy because you didn't get the verdict that you wanted in a case that's the opposite of justice. When you say that that's an injustice, no, an injustice is accusing everyone you don't like of being a racist. That's injustice. That is nonsense. And that's a congresswoman. And there have been plenty of those. You can look at the wonderful AOC's Twitter feed, and you'll see much of the same from all the other members of the squad and any progressives that you have in Congress right now. It is ridiculous. The prosecution got yelled at twice during the trial, and this is used as some sort of proof that the judge is biased towards the defense. That judge had a reputation for being very lenient towards the defense, that judge has a reputation for being very lenient towards the defense in a lot of cases, which in most cases, by the way, is what Democrats like. They like a defendant or a judge who gives the benefit of the doubt to the defendant. And so the judge yelled at the prosecution because the prosecution initially said that Kyle Rittenhouse pled Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and then later, when he decided to testify, made it so that his testimony a violation of the Bill of Rights for you to use the defendant's silence against him in court. You can't do that. It's literally the Fifth Amendment. You have the right to remain silent, and the right to remain silent cannot be used against you as an indicator of your guilt, and that's exactly what the prosecution did. It's like the man never went to law school. This does not speak very well for the University of Michigan Law School. I will say that. That prosecutor is a joke. He was then yelled at again because the judge determined that it would not be allowable to submit evidence, certain kinds of evidence that didn't have anything to do with the court. And then he tried to do it anyway. And the judge yelled at him for that. He said, you can't do that. You know you can't do that. And now people are saying, well, the judge was obviously biased against the prosecution. And it's like, no, you can't do these things. You're not allowed to use a defendant's right to silence against him. Anyway, it was always going to be used as proof that if the verdict didn't come out that Kyle Rittenhouse was guilty on all 5 counts that he was being charged with, and also the 6th count of white supremacy, which he wasn't charged with, but the media made sure to convict him on. If he didn't get convicted on all that, it was always going to be demonstrative of bias in the system or some sort of systemic racism in the system. Everyone's making a case on the left that a white mass shooter gets to walk free, but black men are convicted every single day. Less than a month ago, a black male in a high school shot 2 people in a high school, and that day went out on bail. But we're not talking about that because that doesn't fit the narrative. So that got brushed over under the rug very quickly. But it's ridiculous. It is not a good demonstration of bias in the system when a court case doesn't go your way. Ahmaud Arbery has barely been covered on the news. You've seen nothing but Kyle Rittenhouse. Meanwhile, those 2 men who shot, I don't know if all 3 of them are on trial right now. I know the 2 are. The 2 men who shot Ahmaud Arbery are going to go to prison. But that one doesn't fit the narrative because when 2 white men shoot a black man and then get convicted, well, okay, that doesn't mean the system works. No, what it means is they're guilty in that case, and everyone can see that. It's on video. We know it. We've listened to the evidence. We're saying, oh, those guys are guilty. When you listen to Kyle Rittenhouse's testimony, when you watch the video, there's videotape of him being chased and struck and having a pistol pointed at him. And people still think that because he was there, he didn't, you lose the right to not die? The prosecutor basically said, well, Joseph Rosenbaum didn't kill you, so therefore, you weren't in danger. No, if your man attempts to take your gun away from you, you can only assume he is going to use that gun to harm you. This is why you can't fight a police officer, for example. When you fight a police officer, every confrontation has deadly consequences from the police officer's point of view. You have a gun if you're a police officer. If you lose a fight, you could die because they can take your gun and kill you. So if somebody attempts to take your gun, they're not attempting to have a tea party with you. They're taking your gun for bad intentions. It's the only reason. So when someone tries to take your weapon, you have the right to shoot him. When you're chased down the street and then a man lunges and grabs the barrel of your rifle and tries to pull it away from you, you have a right to shoot him. You do. You're not allowed to be threatened. Someone says, I'm going to kill you. Then they chase you. Then they try to fight you. And then they try and take your gun away from you. No one has that right. So Joseph Rosenbaum is shot. Kyle Rittenhouse struck in the head with a skateboard. You can kill someone with a skateboard. You absolutely can. If you hit them in the head and they fall to the ground and you hit them in the head again and maybe a third time, you can kill someone with a skateboard. Have you ever felt the deck of a skateboard? Very hard. The trucks, they're made of metal. It's not pleasant. You don't want to get hit. You ever catch a skateboard to the shin? Think how painful that is. Now amplify that by a grown man swinging it and hitting you in the head. It's ridiculous. It was a ridiculous case that this trial was used as the pivot point that demonstrates whether or not we've slipped into some sort of white supremacist nation, which apparently, according to the left, we have, because Kyle Rittenhouse walked free. This has always been my big problem with people on the left. They're using a case like this to demonstrate something that everyone should know is not true. If you say racism exists, no one argues. Of course racism exists. The only thing I say to people when they say stuff like systemic racism or racism in the system or bias within the system is show it to me. Point it out. Where in this trial do you believe the bias occurred exactly? Do you think it was the fact that he was not convicted? Do you think that all 12 members of the jury are also complicit in white supremacy? That's what Cori Bush says. All 12 members of the jury. I'm going to be surprised. I don't know. We obviously don't know what the jury, the racial makeup of the jury is. I don't think we know that. But we don't know anything about the jury. But I would be curious. I would be curious if there were any black members of the jury. And if there are they complicit in white supremacy? Cori Bush would say yes. Michael Eric Dyson would say yes. Michael Eric Dyson was just on some show on MSNBC and said a black mouth is moving, but a white idea is coming out when referring to the new lieutenant governor of Virginia. So these people will accuse anyone who doesn't agree with them of being a white supremacist, regardless of the person's skin color. You can be black and still be a white supremacist, according to people on the left. And all 12 members of the jury, the judge, the defendant, the defense, and anyone who disagrees with them about the verdict is complicit in white supremacy, according to our betters in Congress like Cori Bush. It is a ridiculous proposition from top to bottom. And we should be glad that the media, the corporate press, is being exposed for what they are, and the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse, if he has any semblance of intelligence whatsoever, he will sue the hell out of everyone. If I was him, I'd be filing lawsuits today. Get that money. These people defamed you for years. For a year, they have defamed you, called you a white supremacist, said you were guilty of everything, and it's time to get that money. Because the Covington Catholic kid, I think he got something like $200 million from CNN for their false coverage of his incident. So if I was Kyle Rittenhouse, that's what I'd be doing today. Get paid. And bankrupt the corporate press. Get these people, these not serious faux journalists out of there. CNN is the worst example. MSNBC is also really bad. Hold on, let me see if I can pull this article up real quick. I saw an article just yesterday that said, here's a quote from MSNBC. Kyle Rittenhouse trial was designed to protect white conservatives who killed. MSNBC, you're betters. They know that the trial was designed to protect white conservatives who kill, because somehow we designed the area of the trial to make sure that white conservatives get away with it. That's what we did. Now, whatever. These people are not serious. That's the point. The corporate press is terrible. They're to blame. It's a good thing Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all 5 charges. And this is a good day because we didn't sacrifice a teenager to the woke mob. Justice did its thing. And by the way, this trial never should have gone, or this case never should have gone to trial in the first place. It was politicized from the beginning. The prosecution should be ashamed of itself for not having the backbone to not bring this to trial. They looked like fools up there trying to make their case. And everyone who actually watched any bit of the trial should know this. The prosecutor, by the way, pointed a gun at the jury. He held up the AR-15, finger on the trigger, and pointed it at the jury. What a moron. Anyone who knows anything about gun safety knows rule number 1, always treat a gun like it's loaded. Rule number 2, don't point the gun at anything you don't want to shoot. Rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger, out of the trigger guard. The first 3 rules, he violated all of them in a courtroom. He points a gun at the jury with his finger on the trigger. This prosecutor's a moron and should be ashamed of the fact that he caved and brought this to trial in the first place. Him and his Star Wars lapel pins. What a fool. Anyway, before we get off on too much of a change, and I just wanted to go over it a little bit, talk about this trial and why it was important, and hopefully we won't see too much in the way of unrest, too many riots. I think it's too cold in Wisconsin right now for people to get out and riot. I think we're lucky this didn't happen in summer because I bet people would have been in the streets last night. And only thing saving us right now is the cold weather. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the day. I am Tyler Chrestman. Thank you for tuning in. Any questions, comments, concerns, if you disagree with me, especially if you disagree with me, leave comments on the video. Send me some emails, whatever you'd like. And I'd love to hear back. I always like people who disagree with me. It's always fun to kind of work through ideas. So anyone at all, if you got anything to say, just leave some comments in the videos. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. And I will catch you on the next one. Have a good one.